right, we are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Professor Joe Ivey is joining us from over at Lipscomb University, professor of management, taking your calls and questions on the Plus or on Facebook at newschannel5.com. We have a few of those, Professor, for you. Brittany is saying, all right, we were talking about help for small businesses, and I assume she's a small business owner. And she's just wondering, is there any other potential help out there beside another loan? And I understand where she's coming from on this. She doesn't want to get further into debt, something she can't get out of by borrowing to just stay afloat right now. What other options can there be? And I'm sure she's not the only one feeling that way.
Absolutely. The great thing about these loans are the forgiveness aspect when you meet the criteria. So you begin to look at these a little bit differently than typical kind of debt, as long as you believe you can meet the criteria for forgiveness. Other than that, you basically have to just go back to trying to generate more revenue. At the end of the day, the real challenge here is that revenue in many of these small businesses went absolutely to zero. And so if we're going to survive and begin to thrive again, we may have to get very creative about what we do to begin to stimulate revenue inside of our own businesses. The great thing about small business is they can adapt very quickly. And I have a great deal of confidence in the resilience and innovation of small business people, but I know it's awfully painful and challenging right now. I would not be afraid of the PPP program, even though it's labeled debt, if you meet the criteria for the forgiveness. It doesn't really act like debt at that particular point.
Okay, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I hope Brittany was paying attention and other small business owners. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be something you're going to have to pay back or things will be worked out. These are maybe called loans, right, Professor? But many of them could be forgiven. And I'm sorry, I don't have all the criteria in front of me. But if you meet that in a lot of these cases, they're not going to come ask you to pay it back.
That's exactly right.
Okay, very important.
That is something very important for people to know. But they need to also make sure they can meet the criteria before they go and take the loans as well.
All right, and that's easy enough to look through. But I understand not wanting to take on more debt at this time, the way that shakes out. So let me ask you then, have you observed then, again, some of the border states, and just maybe in terms of where Tennessee stands economically? I saw some reports that Nashville, especially, Music City, was hit harder than other major cities across the country, in large measure because this is such a destination point. People love coming here. Music City draws an awful lot of revenue from its visitors and tourism, perhaps more so than a lot of cities much larger than us. All right, so where does Tennessee stand economically, maybe, and Nashville compared to others across the country?
Yeah, the leisure industry, the leisure and entertainment industry, has been the hardest hit by this particular recession because people can't travel. This unemployment has cut off a lot of the discretionary income that's available to people that they use for leisure activities. And Nashville is one of the top leisure destinations in the country. And so we have been hit very hard on the leisure segment of our economy. Now, there have been some hopeful signs. Just the end of this past week, it looks like hotel bookings are beginning to pick back up slowly, although they're still only at about 25% of the level from this time last year. But at least they're picking up. They're not continuing to trend down. And there are some organizations that are beginning to book events out into the future. Once again, not at the levels that Nashville needs, but at least we're beginning to see some light at the end of that tunnel as well. The other part of our economy in Nashville that is not as evident, but is also very, very powerful, is the healthcare industry. And the healthcare industry is going to have to adapt and readjust some of their approaches. But I have found historically Nashville healthcare has been very innovative and very resilient. We spawn a lot of entrepreneurs that can just thrive in this time of disruption. And so that gives me a great deal more confidence about Nashville, that we have this healthcare engine as well as the entertainment. So perhaps it will take off more rapidly, and I believe that could be helpful to us.
Really kind of the last question. I think maybe get a more detailed answer on this as we go through. You talked about adapting, and we're adapting right now. I mean, if we weren't in COVID and we had you on as a guest, you'd probably be sitting next to me right now. You're a local professor and you can come in and join me in the studio. Instead, we're doing it here. I'm one of the only reporters here at the station. Everyone else is working from at home. Our producers are, and that's the way it works. I'm wondering, as things get back up and running, even when this virus finally does just get the heck out of here, how much of what we've adapted to will stay the same? That maybe we've learned that some things work better and this is a better way of doing things in general, having nothing to do with social distancing or protecting, but just that maybe businesses have discovered other ways, especially I think folks working more at home who can, of doing things that save money and are more efficient.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think that what's happened is we've just had a large social experiment that's accelerated the pace of this kind of change. Now, if this behaves fairly typically, there's going to be a pendulum and we're going to swing to one extreme, and then it's going to come back to more of a normal, a new normal. That phrase gets a little overused, but a new normal, which I think will be several years down the road of where it would be if we had done this naturally. So you look at working at home. We're going to begin to see the jobs that work that you can do effectively at home. But the other aspect of that is people are going to begin to understand whether they want to work at home or not. And not everyone does. I think prior to this pandemic and this experiment that we've been going through, a lot of folks would have said, man, it would be great to work at home. And many of us have found that it's not nearly as good as we thought it was. So I think there's going to be some adjustment there. But there are going to be more opportunities for people who want to work at home to be able to do that. The other place is on online retail. There's been a trend for the last several years of incrementally more retail going online. I think we've accelerated that. People are beginning to see, here are the things that I can shop for online that I really didn't think that I could effectively. And then the third, I think, is going to be in the medical front. This whole pandemic and the response to it has broken down a lot of the regulatory and payer barriers to telemedicine. And I think people are going to begin to do more and more telemedicine, at least in their primary care settings. So we've accelerated that trend quite a bit as well. So I think what we're actually seeing here is that things that we were gradually moving toward have been accelerated, and we've moved 2 or 3 years down the road as to where we would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw that last week with, as you were talking about some of the big businesses, JCPenney declaring bankruptcy, joining some others. They were already going in that direction as more and more people shop online, but I think this pandemic was the thing that just forced their hand that direction. They couldn't stay afloat anymore.
Absolutely. This has been a big accelerant to a lot of trends that we've been seeing, both positive trends, moving more online, but also the negative trends of the effects that it's going to have on legacy businesses as people do that. Yeah,
that's a shame when you see some of those that have been around. You and I can remember how long they've been around and how things have changed.
Right.
But it's my belief, and I wonder if you agree, though, that, Zoom. Wow. Now, folks can get up in the morning and you can have your news meeting like we have, where we have all our reporters on Zoom instead of having to come here wherever they happen to live, and they can do the Zoom and make their story pitches. We can discuss news of the day, and then they can go straight from there to meet their photographer wherever that might be, and the two of them get together on a story, and Zoom saves time, saves gas, gets you to the story faster.
Absolutely. It does do all of those things. You also have to kind of put that against perhaps the negatives. What happens, Zoom? What happens around the water cooler? What happens in sort of the informal conversation? Zoom allows us to do things very well formally, but not nearly as well informally. And I think that's going to be one of the interesting discoveries that comes out of this, is how much of our work was actually done in an informal setting and through informal relationships that probably have been sacrificed to a fairly large degree during the last couple of months.
Very interesting. I don't know. I'm on that side of it, Professor, where I like the social aspect of it. I like the water cooler. I like the interaction with my colleagues. I'll miss that. I know there's other ways to do it, and maybe that's because you and I are from that era. I can tell you right now, my son is going to adapt to this new normal, if that's what you want to call it, like that, because he's grown up with this kind of stuff. With me, I miss the social interaction. I definitely will. Hey, Professor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just a really interesting conversation, and maybe we can do this again.
Love to do it. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, sir. That's Professor Joe Ivey from over at Lipscomb. Very interesting about what we're dealing with now and where we're going to go from here. Listen, we'll take a break. I'll be back to wrap things up right after this.